Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Wrestling with Reality podcast. I am your host, Eric Melikian, and we are very honored to have Mr. JT Southern for this very rare interview today. How are you doing, sir?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for coming on and doing this. I know you haven't done any interviews, and this might actually be your first interview, so we're truly honored to have you on today.
Yeah, it's I've deflected it for 30 years. I figured, at some point I might as well do one, and this is the one.
Yeah, we're so honored to have you. And to get started here, because we were talking a little off air, you got so many great stories. I mean, you were in professional wrestling during a very, pivotal time. It went from a regional thing and territory to territory and became a big national phenomenon.
Right.
Well, tell us a little bit how you started in professional wrestling.
It was just an easy accident. That would be the best way to put it. I had a trucking business in Florida. I was working out. There were guys in the gym. We bounced in bars. I was, unfortunately, not to sound ignorant, I like to fight. And someone had told me that, hey, I wasn't exposed to wrestling. I didn't watch it. I know it was probably the first WrestleMania, which was what, 84?
19 March of 85.
Yeah. And the guy said, he goes, you'd be a fit for this. You got the hair and, we were pals. And all I saw at it was, I was 26, 27 was dollar signs. I mean, I didn't look at it. I looked at it as just another business venture, just like my trucking business. And we went to an arena, saw a match, Blackjack Mulligan and someone else, I think Ron Bass, and they're smacking each other in the chest. And I'm thinking, you gotta be shitting me. I didn't realize what it was, that the theatrics to it. But as I told you earlier, I decided to jump in. I thought, I'm 27. I've got the vitality and youth. I'm in great shape. Let's give it a whirl. I can't do this later on. I can always go back to my business as it was. So Mike Graham had a wrestling camp in Orlando, but I chose to go out of state because I thought if I got hurt, I'd go home really fast. Not that it would derail me from going forward. But if I went somewhere, I'd have to stick it out. So ended up at Passarella's Quest, where Tony Altimore, who was one of the Sicilians, had a wrestling camp. So I traveled up there, loaded up the car, knew nobody, found a place to stay. I mean, just let's do this. And from there, it started out, I knew nothing. And to be honest with you, I'm going to be right off the top of this conversation. I wasn't a good wrestler. I was a good fighter. I just couldn't, acclimate my brain to, it's like a dance. Every match, that as a referee, it's those guys know how to go. I just couldn't, lock into it because it was foreign to me. In the ring, I would never talk to the opponents. I would just start wailing. But going back to being with Tony, so, they taught you all the basics. It was a good ground zero opportunity for me to learn. And then I found out about the personalities. It was like being in a sideshow where everyone's a character. I'm this, I'm that. And a lot of guys never got off the gas on that character. It personified everything they were. And from what I understand now, some of the guys are still beating that drum at 60 and 70 years old. Bill Dundee, still dying. And Bill's a fine guy. He's an excellent worker. And he was always kind to me when I worked in Mid-South. But you think, ooh, that's a long way to go and still have to be dragging that dead horse up a waterfall. And I was telling you earlier, when I was there, Ted Arcidi just set the world bench press record at 705.5. He surpassed Bill Kazmaier's 661 by 40 pounds. We became friends. He was a character, a school teacher. He was a math teacher. And he would tell me how he would do his steroids. He had a mathematical equation on what steroids to take at what time to go along with the calories. And I thought, well, that's brilliant. And so I'm up there alone. And, in everything, even any business, it's cliquish. So you get up there, and at Quest, there was a guy named Paul Roma, who and Paul, Paul had it all. He was good looking, had an amazing physique. He was a good athlete. He was an asshole. But all the guys swirled around him. He was the guy. The unfortunate thing that I saw in the beginning was, it's very much a pimp-poor relationship between promoters and wrestlers. So you've got these guys, and it's just business. They're putting those guys out there like a record label. Are you going to be a one-hit wonder, or are we going to get something out of you? But when you're going out nationally and you're jobbing, it's really hard to go somewhere else after getting beat and become a star. So, Paul was in that position, and, everyone was cranked up trying to get, walk over each other's graves to get that spot. And he didn't like me. And let me just go back up. When I was working with Tony gave me the best advice ever. I mean, seriously. He said, don't talk. Don't talk to anybody. And I said, why? He goes, because it'll make them nervous. And you know what? It was the truth. Because I was big enough, it put that question mark for anyone, what are you thinking? And it made people, they just couldn't figure you out or size you up. So I had a flame out with Paul. He said something, I don't know what it was, but the short of it was, he told me on a Friday night in front of everybody, after like one of the wrestling sessions, he goes, me and you are going to get in the ring and we're going at it. And I'm like, okay. So Friday, 8:00, gym's locked. There's like 10 guys in the gym who were all learning to wrestle. And there's Paul in the middle of the ring doing stretches. And I walk in and I'm like, he's got some guy. It was bizarre. He's rubbing his shoulder. This is my trainer. So I get in the ring. I'm thinking, I got nothing to worry about. I haven't been beaten up before. If I get beat, I beat. And he's telling me all the things he's going to do to me, all this shit. And I walk up to him and I go, I'm going to break your leg and you'll never wrestle again. That's all I said. He turned around and started MFing me. He goes, you're a loser. You'll never go anywhere. I'm going to be a star. Packed up his shit and left. And I thought to myself, wow, I wish everything was that easy. Just telling a guy. But I mean, I basically whispered it to him. But it was the beginning of understanding, how this pecking order went. And, it's like being in prison. You realize every once in a while you have to get in a real fight to kind of let these other guys and they are genuinely tough guys. If you're taking bumps 7 nights a week, I don't care if you could be 150 pounds. That as rep. It's like, holy crap, how can you do this to your body? You're a tough son of a bitch.
Absolutely.
So, I segued out of there. I was living in Fort Lauderdale, had a place up in Connecticut, then went back to New Jersey where I was originally from. And then it worked into going to the Monster Factory with Larry. And, Larry was smart. He told me his story in a nutshell was he saw Buddy Rogers as a kid and that was it. It was over. That's all he wanted to be. Larry was not a handsome man. He was not like, you'd look at him and say he's physically imposing, but his psychology was fabulous. And he instilled that into Scott. And Scott was an anomaly. I mean, you've got a 400-pound guy doing cartwheels. He did it all. And he was a good guy. And he was clever because in the beginning, Larry would run these matches or wherever he would put us into a match. As soon as you put up a sign for wrestling, the arena or the gym was packed. I mean, packed. The American public couldn't get enough. So someone brought in Billy Graham, and Scott put Billy Graham over. And Billy was on the backside of his career. And man, that was a door opener for Scott. It was smart. Scott knew the business. He knew how to avail himself and how to protect himself. And, his career went through the roof between Japan and, what he did in WWF. But his ending was just like I said earlier about, Rick Rude, Kurt Hennig, Pillman, just a myriad of those guys. He's dead. And, the attrition rate on suicide by, not that you intentionally did it, it's still huge, or it was huge at that time. I was always surprised, like, oh, he died, Pat Tanaka, or Brickhouse Brown, I mean, whatever, if it was cancer or whatever, a lot of these guys are gone. I don't know how many industries or sports, that have that many. But the Monster Factory was cool. Larry was savvy. He knew how to place people. I think that one of the failings was he banked on Scott to get him into WWF to be his manager. And
you talking about Bam Bam Bigelow, correct? When you mentioned the name Scott.
Yeah, that's what I call Scott Bigelow. So, that was, and I don't know if they had worked out. I know Larry said something to me about getting a percentage when I went down to Memphis initially. You're going to pay me this much. And he forego it, I never did, but I know that him and Scott were, I don't know what the end result was, but Larry was a good guy. They were, it was an eye-opening time. He's taking us up to New York for interviews. We're doing, little radio spots, and you think this is pretty cool. But it was, I just couldn't digest a lot of it. I was Pollyannish, and do I regret that I didn't pay attention to it? Nah. My journey's been my journey. Where I ended up now is exactly where I should have been. It took me 30 years longer to get here. I have no regrets. I am glad that being a wrestler wasn't the end of my journey. Like, this is all it is, and when it's over, what do you do then? So, go to Larry, go to Memphis. Jerry Lawler saw a picture of me in a Northeast magazine, and he called Dave Schultz up, who lived in Tennessee. And Dave contacted Larry. Somehow that's how I ended up down here. And I remember going to, they gave me a start date to Jackson. And I walk into the arena, the match is already on, and they're having a barbed wire match. I can't remember the name, Paul something or other, but it's inconsequential. And there's blood everywhere. And I'm thinking, this isn't for me. This is insane. I mean, it was everywhere, covered. So I go down to Mid-South Coliseum. It's a Monday show. We would work Mid-South every Monday, Louisville Tuesday, Evansville Wednesday, shot on Thursday, shot on Friday, Memphis for TV on Saturday, and then Nashville at the arena, the fairgrounds, Saturday night. And then Sunday was also another shot. And it was kind of like one of those, I don't know, like a Rocky moment. I get there, the place is all dark. There's a light over the ring. I walk out there, like a rube, and get in the ring and bounce up and down. And there's all the dried blood. And I'm thinking, I got to go home. I'm out of my mind being here. And it started from there. And, Lawler was helpful. I became friends with Austin Idol. He was helpful. They were dragging me up a waterfall. Sometimes I could turn out a really good match. Sometimes it was just because, again, I was disconnected from it. But I learned a lot there, but also learned the psychology of how the promoters punish the wrestlers. So Fred Ottman, Big Bubba, you know who that is? Okay, so John Pino, they were doing Typhoon and something else.
Tugboat. He was Tugboat in the WWF.
Tugboat. So he's down there. He's 6'9", 390. His partner was a guy named Goliath, 400 from Philly, 6'11", and the place was packed. Memphis, the arena. And they come in after the matches and say, because the guys are hoping to God that they're getting $250. And jurors come in and say, well, we had to paper the house, boys. It's $50. And I got my arms around two 400-pound guys who were crying on my shoulder. It's like, I can't pay my rent this. I can't, what are we going to do? And I'm like, holy shit. It was, Jarrett's were ruthless. They had no compassion. It was a one-way street with those guys. Bill Dundee probably they took care of him because it was Bill Dundee, and he sold tickets, and he knew enough. The other guys funneling in there, I was, honestly, I was real surprised. I mean, I know Jeff became an excellent wrestler, and he's a Hall of Fame wrestler, and he has had great business savvy. But I always thought when he was going to move up that he would be beat. The guys would have remembered in New York, how hard him and his dad and his grandmother made it on him. And that I really thought they're going to cripple him. But of course, that didn't happen. Should it have happened? Lack of conscience. Yeah, it's just money. I mean, how much do you need? But that's, another story for another time.
Absolutely. Now, you were in Memphis back in the mid to late 80s. Did you run into Eddie Gilbert at all over there?
Eddie Gilbert was there. I was there in 86 and came back in 87. And Eddie Gilbert was there. So many guys funneled through there. Tommy Rich, that were, their careers were cycling because we were talking about earlier, the territories. They went down, of course they got eliminated to nothing now. So you're in one of three places. Back then, I remember Austin Idol telling me, in the late 70s, he'd pick up the phone and he'd call Jim Barnett and go to Australia, or he'd go to England, or he'd go to Japan, that it was always that available. And as that window closed, you still had the same volume and greater now of guys trying to get in there. And, the need to cut throats became more present. That those guys were out, and that goes with when I was at WCW, that those guys were not only protecting their spot, and I don't want to say that they were looking to bury you, but everyone wanted to get the brass ring.
No, I totally understand. Very cutthroat business back then. And even though the payoffs might have been smaller in some of the territories like Memphis, the money was still better than it was, a few years later.
Yeah, the money,
I know a couple of people that have been in Memphis, and it was pretty bad. Like I heard guys getting $20 payoffs.
Well, they would always take advantage of you. I mean, it's no different than politics. It's just lying. We're going to lie to you. Again, I wasn't a promoter. I don't know what it took to flip the switch and turn the lights on that arena, what your overhead was. So I can't always be, they screwed you every time. But you knew the lifestyle they were living. And I have nothing against it. I mean, that's just being an entrepreneur. But you can't kill the golden goose to get all the eggs. Take care of these guys. Why are you punishing them? For what reason? I mean, it was just, I had worked in Memphis and we supplied all our own photos. They had the gimmick table. And I went, Jeff Jarrett's grandmother, Christine Jarrett, she was horrible. She was a horrible person. And now, I don't know if she ever married before she had Jerry Jarrett. But I remember coming back the next year, and on the table, my pictures and T-shirts, everything was gone. And I went up to her, and we were doing Louisville, and I said, "Hey, do you have the money for all the stuff of mine that I left that got sold?" And she goes, "Are you accusing me of being a thief?" And I mean, it wasn't put out with any volume. And I said, "No." I said, "I just, She goes, "You're fired." I was like, okay. So I went into Lawler's dressing room and I said, he goes, "You're on second match. Why aren't you dressed?" I said, "Christine Jarrett just fired me." And he's like, "Screw that. Go put your shit on." And I was like, okay. But it was all that pettiness that, it was like the guys ribbing one another, throwing their wallets in the toilet and stupid shit. You're thinking, why are you doing this? There's no humor to it. The one uptick I can say is, if I said, oh, I had a point of pride in my career, I never got ribbed because I was always cranked up. I was always ready to go. And the guys, I mean, I knew who to respect and I knew who to push and push hard. And it worked out pretty well. So.
Now, tell us, just to track back a little bit. I know you were on a TV piece, that involved, Bam Bam Bigelow, Larry Sharpe, and the Monster Factory, and they did a huge piece on you in that too. Can you tell us
Yeah,
a little bit of the backstory with that?
yeah, that was, everyone couldn't get enough to get in. And, the TV station, it was just, they knitted that together because Larry was based in Jersey. I think it came out of a Philadelphia TV station. So it was good fodder because everyone, all they could talk about was Hulk Hogan and Macho Man. I mean, it permeated everything. So there was no separation of the daily news without wrestling. So let's put this in here. These are new guys, Scott with his head tattooed, and Larry was looking, I looked the part. I just didn't fulfill what they were hoping me to fulfill. I'm not ashamed of it. It's like, he has a certain look. We can do this with him. But, when you think about quality of wrestling and you think about the guys that like a Kurt Hennig and or Rude or Randy Savage, I mean, the techniques, Bret Hart, that you have a guy like me who would be like the same thing as saying Ultimate Warrior. He jerked on the ropes, beat his chest and, got put over like $1 million. I mean, so they were looking to sell me not as a premier worker. They were looking to sell me as a look. I was like, 260-pound David Lee Roth at that second.
Well, and it worked out for a lot of guys. Look at guys like Lex Luger. They became millionaires, based off their look and
Absolutely.
they could pull in. I mean, that's what the business is about. It's about drawing people at the end of the day. I mean, I've worked with so many guys that are great workers, but a lot of them, some of them drew money, some of them didn't.
No, absolutely. I mean, I admired the guys that had the talent. I can never focus on it. Again, I came from racing motocross and all that. That was the whole deal. And again, that's why I wanted to open the motorcycle shop. I was just available and I was tough enough to take the hits. But going back to Memphis, I said, earlier, I would not tell you anything that I heard secondhand. There was a lot of unhealthy stuff that, I got to view, and I don't know how far to go into this, but, with Lawler, Lawler had a penchant for underage girls. Just, there was a lot of crazy stuff that, and I'm not trying to proselytize, like, I'm not putting anything out there. But, there were so many pullbacks, but I guess it's the same thing with guys that are movie stars, anyone who's famous. The line gets so blurred on what you do, what you can get away with, and what people permit and forgive. And it was, it's just like the wrestling business. You're a heel one week, you're a baby face the next. The reason I probably made a mistake, I should have been a heel. But so I go to Memphis to work for Mid-South, and cursing's okay, right? We're grown ups.
Yeah, whatever you want to do, sir. It's up to you.
So, I'm at the fairgrounds in Nashville, and I'm standing. Our match is next, and I got the little gate, walks out to the ring, and there's this old woman. She's dead now because I was 27, and she had to be 80 at the time, and she's holding my arm and rubbing it. She's going, "You're a good boy. You're a good boy." And Bill Dundee walks out, and she turned to him, and she goes, "I hope you fucking die, you cocksucker." And it paralyzed me. I was like, oh, grandma's hating someone, I don't want grandma to hate me. So seriously, it kind of like ruined everything. I was like, and because Larry said, "Be a heel." He goes, "You'll make a great heel." And I would have made a better heel than a baby face. But that was seriously, that pushed the needle so far over. I'm thinking, oh, when I say my prayers at night, how do I wash that one off? Grandma might have some extra juice with God.
Yeah, no, and that's what happened in those territories back then. I heard stories in the LA territory about how some of the grandmothers would get pretty feisty too and, start hitting the guys, start, swinging their purse at them, pull knives. It was kind of the norm.
there was one time I was in Memphis and I walked into the ring and the guy goes, the ref, I can't remember his name. And he goes, your back's all scratched up. And I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, you're bleeding all over your back. Someone put a razor blade between their fingers, and they'd go out, they'd pat you on the back. And he didn't know. He had no idea that it was happening. And I'm like, holy crap. I said, am I bleeding bad? He goes, enough. I said, before the match started, I said, can I do the match? He goes, yeah. He goes, just go. He goes, and he told the guy to rake my back. So it seemed like that's what it was. But, there was stuff like that. I mean, we were in, in Louisville, Bigelow and I, we traveled together when I got down there. We roomed up. And they were walking 2 cops out to the ring. And someone went to stab Scott with a knife and stabbed the cop. I saw this in his service belt. They took that kid and they took him down the stairwell and put the boots to him. I don't know what the end result was, but stuff like that. And it's like when I went to Gillies and I saw Tonga Kid, and everyone's in the locker room with guns. And I'm like, I don't own a gun. I always felt cockstrong enough to handle myself. And he's like, oh, brother, you go out after the match, they shoot you between the cars. And he's showing me his bullet holes. He's like, I got one here, and I got one here, and I got one here. And I'm thinking, holy moly, this is a lot, because they believed it. The fans believe when you're cheating. And by God, I'm not going to allow that to happen. You hurt someone I love. So it got a little, same thing when I went to Oregon for Billy Jack Haynes. It was the same thing up there. Now we'll talk about that, but you're thinking, at what point did these people not realize this is fake? And we can never expose it. But Vince McMahon did as soon as the tax. Well, the tax on theaters is less than the tax on sports. Well, we're going to do a big promo. It's all fake. And did they lose one fan? Nope. Everyone still loved it the same. So, whatever the next portion of this is you want to segue into.
Well, let's go into the AWA. I was doing some research and I noticed you wrestled Kevin Wacholtz, Kevin Kelly, who ended up becoming Nails later on. And there's a lot of stories out there about him. How was he to work with, and how was it just dealing with him generally?
Kevin was a hothead. And he was, I guess, he told me when we were there, he goes, I was a bounty hunter. Then we ended up also at OWF after AWA, Kevin and I. And it was just, the thing was, again, going back to Tony Altomore, if they give you a potato, if they hit you hard, hit them back the same amount. And that kind of calmed it down. You didn't want to give anyone any leverage on you. And Kevin, stiff clotheslines, we worked tight, we talked. I socialized with none of the guys. It was best for me always to stay by myself, because you didn't know when anyone was ever going to, stab you in the back. So, most of the guys were independent. Kevin was totally independent. He never was with anyone. And I heard about the thing about him beating up Vince, hitting him. And I actually, why not? You're in a very physical contact business. Your emotions are running high. You're trying to do something hurt. Whatever that thing with him and Vince on money or whatever, you just get sick of it. You get sick of anyone manipulating. If this is your word, just pay me what you said you're going to pay me. But do I think he was dangerous? I never got to the moment where I thought me and him were going to lock horns. We would talk, we would wrestle, and it'd be done. So, but I don't know. Kevin was fine. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of stories that swirl around him and where he ended up and what he went back to. But a lot of those guys, were generally, where do they come from with that toughness? The big Joshes and stuff like that. Billy Jack Haynes. Billy Jack Haynes was a street fighter like me. That's where he got found by the British Bulldogs. They knew that there was going to be a fight, a money fight, and they went and saw it, and it was Billy. When I worked with him, he told me that story. So, you have a lot of guys that are very tenacious. And as you know, as a ref, how many guys, bumps night after night, broken shoulder, collarbones. I wrestled with broken collarbone. I broke fingers all the time, cracked ribs, get in the ring, because you got to protect your spot or someone else is going to take it if you have a spot.
And back then too, you didn't get paid if you didn't work. That's what a lot of the guys did.
No. Well, actually, I remember having a guy break my collarbone, stomped on it. I think it was a TV taping in Memphis for Mid-South, and going to Jerry Jarrett in Louisville and saying, my collarbone's broke. And him looking at me saying, that's okay, take off tonight, take off tomorrow, take off the week. If you're not in the ring tonight, you're fired. So I go in, I talk to the guy, I said, hey, my collarbone's broke, just work around it. Bell rings, first thing he does is he runs over and punches me right, gives me a fist right in the collarbone, and I'm like, my pecker turned into a belly button. I was like, oh, that hurt. And then we went through the match, and it was that way, tape it up and take aspirins. But I guess, again, going back to a lot of those guys, over medicating and dying, that's what stuff like that, they said that about Rude. Now that, again, I don't know, but, his neck, and then, I medicate. Same thing with Kurt, I heard, Henny, and it just gets out of control one day. But, there's no union. I mean, remember when Dave Schultz wanted to sue WWF? He had all the receipts for all the drugs he took,
Yes.
And it's like, I can prove these injuries that you supplied me the venue to have all these injuries, and you capitalized on it. Shouldn't I get subsidized for? But, in wrestling, there's guys making a lot of money, and then there's a guy, this. You're either at the top or you're starving. And, how long can you pour yourself out till you grab that brass ring? And the spots for that brass ring were really, very small. So you got to go in with something, extraordinary. I remember when Mark Callis, we were going to the same gym in Nashville, and he got the call from Vince to come up for the interview for the Undertaker gig, like it was New Year's Eve or something. And I mean, he was a super talent, walking the ropes and all that, but they flew him up, and, it turned into a lifetime career for him. So there are those moments where all the stars line up. And then there's so many guys that it doesn't line up for that. I always thought it was so sad that you want to go on TV and do a job so you can go back to your bar and your buddies can buy you a beer. But if that spins your prop, hey, have at it.
Now, during this time, did you ever have any talks with Vince McMahon and the WWF about coming up there?
Fred, Tugboat, he tried, getting me in there. I cut some good promos, and there could have been an opportunity, but, it was, let me jump back to WCW. So the way Van Hammer came in was, I sent them a video of me wrestling, a compilation of me wrestling and playing guitar, and then they stuck it on him. And I was already talking to Jody, and I can't remember Jody's name, who was, he wasn't a booker for WCW, but his son was a wrestler. And I called him up and said, what the hell? You stuck my gimmick on someone. And then he said, sit still. Then a month later, they called up. I got a call from Terry Allen. Hey, we want to talk to you. And, and then, that's the next, whatever, however you want to jump from Memphis to, AWA. If you want to talk more about that, I'll be glad to. And then we can go to OWF and then get to WCW.
Yeah. Let's do that because I know the whole WCW tenure when you were there was very interesting. So I'm sure we'll have a lot to say, or you'll have a lot to say about that. But
Yeah.
let's talk about. I know you worked with Wahoo McDaniel quite often at the beginning of his career. How
So
was that?
I got I got Paul Heyman. I can't remember if it was Memphis or what, but I got Paul Heyman his first managing gig, and Paul ended up in AWA when I was still at Mid South. So Paul kind of got me as a payback. He got me into AWA, and the humor was Paul drove Wahoo nuts. Wahoo had the book, and Paul would cross out names and make new matches. And it drove Wahoo nuts. It's like, Heyman, what the fuck are you doing with my book? He's like, these are better matches. You're wrong. And but there was a lot of humor. So I get up there, and Gene Kaninsky's son, Nick Kaninsky's there. Vern's still alive. Kurt. They had a good crew. Kevin was there. Mitch Snow. They had their Russians, and so I ended up in this town called Plymouth. I moved into, got an apartment, and in Plymouth, the Road Warriors had a gym, and they were funny. They were nice guys. So I go in the gym, and you got to lay it down to kind of be one of the guys. So I was a good deadlift squatter. So I'm knocking out benches like 405 for 8. Get on the squats. Got a 500 squat. Got a 575 dead. So the guy's kind of like, okay, you're one of us. So Jesse Ventura was up there. He was working with WWF at the time. And he comes up to me and goes, JT, Jesse Ventura. And I'm like, again, I want to tell you, you would have thought I was autistic. I talk to nobody. And I'm like, mm-hmm. And he starts telling me about this Porsche he bought. He goes, yeah, I bought it with my wrestling dolls. It's out in the parking lot. I'm like, okay, good. So I finished my workout, got my bag, walking out. And in the parking lot was all gravel, was Joe Animal from Road Warriors. And his son, Joe Jr., is throwing rocks at Jesse's new Porsche. And I'm like, and he's like, you're throwing like a girl, Joe. And the kid's like this big. And he's whipping the rocks at the and I look at him and I go like this. I go, he goes, Jesse's a dick. I was like, yep. And I got in my truck and drove back to my apartment. And I thought, so, it was crazy stuff like that. I'm in there the next couple times, and Hawk comes out, and I'm sitting at the bar and I'm drinking a protein drink. And he comes over and he goes, how you making out up here? And I go, pretty good. And he's got white powder, which I'm just going to say there's white powder all over his nose. And I go, hey, dude, you got white stuff all over your nose. He goes, oh, you want some? I said, no, it's okay. He goes, okay. It was, that kind of insanity. So the wrestling was cool. We got to travel. It was fairly relaxed. It actually, the way they did the interviews and everything in their own studio at Vern's gave you a chance to kind of figure out, how to meter stuff and what to kind of talk about. And Kevin, Kevin was really good. He'd get all cranked up. And he told me he would read something, in the newspaper and then work it into, if it was like, something that was pretty strong conversation, he would weave it into his promo. And I thought, wow, that's really smart, because he kept him on track. So, we got to travel. Adrian Adonis came to work for a while. And I remember Wahoo jumping on Adrian for smoking dope and never being ready to get on a plane in the morning. So we're at the airport and Wahoo's laying it on Adrian in front of everybody, all the boys. And Adrian goes, yeah. He goes, what's that bullet in your pocket? He goes, it was Coke. And he goes, you haven't slept in 22 years. And Wahoo goes, so? And but it was like, I really enjoyed being up there. We had a lot of fun. We had a lot of laughs. Corporal Kirshner came in, another one who ended up going to OWF with us. And that was, the OWF thing was pretty hilarious. but it was a good place to, that's the first time I got to travel. We're getting on a plane. It wasn't solely you're driving to all the shots. So we're going to Vegas, Alan West, all of us. And back then you could smoke on an airplane. So Ray the Crippler Stevens, who was a sweetheart, and I always made sure that I showed him tons of respect. He was just lovely. Always carried his bags, always opened up the doors, always, hey, you deserve this. So the big joke with Kurt Hennig was halcyons, like a knockout pill. Put him in a drink, you pass out. So he puts one in Ray's drink. Ray passes out on the plane. I'm on the aisle and Ray's sitting across from me on the aisle. Medusa Michelli's there. He goes and gets Medusa Michelli's makeup kit and comes over and puts lipstick on Ray, eyeliner, does the whole thing. And we land, and Ray looks over at me, lights up a cigarette. He goes, "How's it going, son?" I said, "Ray, your lips bleeding." And he goes, and all the lipstick goes all over his face. This is like all the fun stuff I've read wrestling. And you're like, I'm not saying anything. So we're walking through the airport and Ray goes, "I got to take a leak." And all of a sudden I hear, "Fucking Hennig." He's screaming in the bathroom. And Kurt's like, "Don't say anything." And I'm like, "You got it." But, they were good guys. It was run just like a mom and pop business. They were a little more conscious of being generous to the guys. So it was definitely uplifting from being from Memphis. Larry, who did the announcing, was a good guy. Vern's daughter was involved in it as well, ran the office. And it was like, oh, so this is really what professional wrestling is like. And then, so then we segued into OWF when Billy left WWF and opened up that. And, it could have been really good. The backstory to that was, being a good wrestler, like in any venture, doesn't make you a good businessman, just makes you a good wrestler. And Billy was charismatic, but the problem was he had no sense on, how to run a business. So everyone came in on a $600 a week guarantee. If you work one night, if you work 4 nights, but at $600 a week, you could survive. So, he had booked so many shows and then the bookings dropped off. I mean, it went flat. There was a guy in Southern Oregon who owned a TV station and owned like multiple of them, as well as in Alaska. And we met with him, and he had a deal set up where they were going to fly us up monthly on Alaskan Air to do a 1 week running, a 7 to 10 day running in Alaska. And Billy signed away the TV rights to another station that paid him nothing. And that was the end of it. I mean, it queered everything. We went down to working 1 day a week. The money ran out. Typical deal. I'm cutting you all loose. I remember, there was a confrontation. Billy called us all in, and it got a little heated with him and myself. And I turned to Fred Tugboat and I said, sack up, we're leaving. Don't sit here. Because Billy was trying to maintain enough of a crew. Mike Miller was there, who was a great guy, to try to resurrect it. But it was DOA. So that could have been something, because he was going against what was Don, who ran Oregon?
Pacific Northwest Wrestling.
Yeah. Don something or other. So he was going against Don, and he could have had a chance, but again, we would be having meetings and Billy would be with 2 Vicks inhalers, one up each nostril. He was out of control. It's a shame he didn't stay with Vince. I know that he almost beat Vince up. He told me that story. And he was tough. He was a tough guy. He was a good guy. It was just, he wasn't the guy to be running his business. If he had used himself as the figurehead and brought someone in to run it, it would have had a good run for a couple of years. So, and then we went from OWF to, I went to independent stuff and, bounced around on that. I was working every week, And then, from there, it went to, the WCW moment.
So how did WCW come about?
Huh?
How did the WCW tenure come about?
It was, like I say, I sent that video in, a promo of me wrestling, playing guitar, and they hung it on Van Hammer. And then I pushed, they opened up a spot. I was going to that UWF stuff, getting my brains beat out to make my mortgage payments. And, so went down there, met Dusty, met Terry Allen, and they were nice, but the problem for me with Turner, or the way I saw it was, Vince had to be entrepreneurial because he was buying the TV time. Ted Turner owned the station. They didn't have to make money. They didn't want to lose money. But the guy that they made the executive director just swung a deal for Hanna-Barbera, the purchase of Hanna-Barbera for Turner. And he didn't have any idea what he was doing. Dusty was still running it, but he was the overseer. And at that moment, there was no momentum. So, I'm in there wrestling. They're trying to give me a spot. They're trying to figure out what to do with me. And well, I'll try to timeline this because it's 30-something years ago. Towards the end of it, they were going to put the strap on in a SummerSlam or whatever it was, Summer something other, with me and Dallas Page. And Dallas I admire. I know, he's a yogi now, but he wanted to wrestle so bad. He got himself to be a pretty professional wrestler. He would videotape everything and then go home and watch it. And the guys, he got along with all the guys. But that was supposed to come up. We would be, like I say, I'm jumping around. We would be in line when you were talking about Scott.
Raven, Scotty.
Yeah, and, again, his father was like the publisher of National Enquirer. And everyone thought he was coming in to do an expose. And guys are real uncomfortable with him. It's like, because all the kayfabe and it's real, and we're not going to say nothing. And who's he? And, people want to laud how super intelligent, and maybe he is. All I know is, for me, I didn't like him. I didn't like him. We didn't get along. He was pushy. And I guess, he pushed himself into a good position later on. I mean, he could wrestle. There was no doubt about that. But we were doing promos. And I remember we were all standing in line, Rich Steiner, Scott Steiner, all in a room, getting ready to go up and do them, for multiple towns. And he said something to me. And I turned around and I said, you got a big fucking mouth. And, it got and everyone got quiet. And he didn't say anything. And it was just like, I should have hit him. I mean, I didn't, but he was just, another one of those guys. It's like, man, I don't belong here. This isn't what I do. I mean, if you want to go and fight, I was always up for that. So we go through all the incarnations there. We're having, the matches were pretty good. I was on $300 a night. And I thought, okay, they're going to book me 300 dates. Well, everything was moving forward. And we were at, I don't know where they're shooting TV, Omni or something. And I always had this thing about when I'd go to a restaurant, I'd always have to sit in the corner and see who's coming up. I always was I guess nervous about having someone coming behind me. And I remember I'm taking a whiz and there's no one else in the bathroom there. And a guy comes up behind me with a deep voice and he goes, JT Southern. And man, I mean, I literally was standing there holding my pecker. And I remember gritting my teeth. I'm like, fuck. And I finished up and I turned around. It was Roberts. And he had just come in and took the book. And he goes to me, I'll make you a deal. And he goes, if you go to the gym with me, to the ring and work with me, I could turn you into something you can make some money. And I was like, I'm in. Whatever you tell me to do, you got me 110%. This is my moment. It couldn't have been a month later, Watts came in and they hated each other. And Watts broomed him out. And as soon as he went, I knew I was done. And that was the end of it. I mean, it was, at that moment, there was nothing else to aspire to. I went back to Memphis for like 2 or 3 shots, and I'm like, over. I don't love it. I could do part of it, and this journey. It was never thought of. Like I said in the beginning, this is nothing I ever aspired to. And when it was done, I mean, I took all my stuff and I went down to the homeless place and threw it in the clothes bin. I mean, all my outfits. And I always hoped to see homeless guys in my robes and tights pushing the grocery cart around, with stuff. I thought, well, that'd be kind of funny. But I mean, that pretty much wrapped it up.
Now, let me ask you, they started a big feud with you and Van Hammer on TV on the syndicate WCW Worldwide, and it just kind of dropped off real quickly. What happened with that whole situation?
Well, I don't know. I really don't have an answer for that. I don't know if they just, lost interest in me really quick. And, because he stayed on, and that was just, I wasn't, I didn't fit the suit. But, in the beginning, they're putting me over. And next thing I know, I'm doing jobs for him and house shows, putting him over. So I don't know if that came as soon as Watts came in, because again, previous to that, Dusty was lining me up to be with Dallas Page and getting the belts on in a summer event. It's like, here's what we're going to do. But one of the highlights down there was I was working with Bagwell. Remember him, Marcus Alexander?
Yeah, who became Buff Bagwell later on.
Yeah, so the humorous story is he just came on, and he's doing that male stripper gimmick pretty much, with the bow tie. And so we're doing TV taping, and we're going over the match. And he's telling me how I'm the heel. He's telling me how the match is going. And you know how the business goes. The heel always calls the match. So I'm like, uh-huh. And he looks at me at the end and he goes, and I've already wrestling like 8 years now. He goes, do you understand what I'm saying? Are you getting this? And man, it lit my fuse. And I was like, oh yeah, I get it. So we go in, we lock up, and I whisper in his ear, I'm changing the match. And look on his face. And I start beating him in the match. I mean, like physically beating him. And you know how it is. It's not theatrical when you start clocking a guy. So at the end, he's supposed to clothesline me over the rope. So he comes running up, and I give him a belly to belly over the rope. And then Scotty comes out, throws him back in Flamingo at that moment, and we're beating on him. And then Tom Zink comes out, and it's in. So I know there's going to be a fight in the locker room. So I head back to the locker room, and Junkyard Dog says to me, he goes, I don't know what that white boy said to you. He goes, but I'll never say that to you. I laugh at him. And Rick Steiner's there, and he goes like this. He goes, so I go in the locker room, and I'm sitting down. I'm sitting in the corner. And sure enough, here comes Bagwell, and I'm already lining him up to shoot on his legs. And he's going off, you buried me out there. I'm going to kick your ass. And it's all this funny stuff. And Dusty comes in. And like, this is like the only good, really super memory I have of wrestling. And he goes to Bagwell. He goes, get out. And he goes, he buried me. He goes, get out. And he shuts the door and he goes, what the hell are you doing out in that ring? He goes, you do stuff like that, no one's going to work with you, which made me kind of like feel good that it was like a nod I could handle myself, because they were always talking about, how tough Arn Anderson was, Steve Williams, all those guys that, were real deal guys. They could really scrap, and I thought, I'm not standing equal with them, but at least I felt good enough in a business where you had to be tough that I had, a little viability there. And, like I said, when Watts took over, it just changed the complexion. And, it didn't make WCW any better at that moment. He didn't, with his son and grab a hold and all that old school stuff. I mean, I look at what I don't even watch wrestling now, but if I occasionally see it, I can't see how their bodies can last more than 3 seasons. Honestly, you can't come out of the ring onto a table or out of the ring onto the floor. We did that thing where I played in a band and got in a fight with Cactus Jack in like '89 in Texas. It was a gimmick. And he told me before, he goes, watch my match. And he was with Mills Mascaris, and he was on the apron, and Mills drop kicked him off the apron onto the floor. I mean, it was like hearing, seriously, 250 pounds of beef hit the floor, the concrete floor, off of the apron. And, I don't know how he's not paralyzed now. I mean, just the abuse he's taken on himself over all these years. But he was another, not in the Arn vein. Like Arn could scrap, but tough men there,
Now, going back to Bagwell, I know he's kind of had a rough journey in his life. You met him, obviously, when he was really young. I want to say maybe 21 years old at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see the potential in him, minus all that, to becoming a star? And do you think maybe he just went down a wrong path?
Well, fame is, I always look at fame and success, especially fame. It's like a sword, and you don't know, do you have the skill to hold the handle or you hold in the blade? And a lot of guys hold the blade and cut themselves. They just can't figure it out. They're caught up in so much. And, even when I was, with Scott, I remember Scott telling Bigelow, when Tyson was on top of the world, he's like, I can kick his ass. And I looked at him, I said, you seriously think that? And he goes, oh yeah. And you have enough people blowing smoke up your ass and telling you never saying no, how do you're not grounded anymore? Rick Steiner was really funny. He was a good guy. Scott was cool, but kind of a jerk. And I remember we were somewhere when I did that band thing in Texas, and Rick's there, and they're like, hey, and, that's before I ended in WCW. And Scott was on rollerblades. And I remember Rick turning around to me going, if you break your leg, you can't work. And if you can't work, you can't make money, and you can't pay your bills. Rick was grounded, and, Scott ended up a lifetime of being a wrestler, and Rick stepped out and had a different life, and those are the guys I admire. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong that, the Bill Dundees, the Jerry Lawlers, the Austin Idols. God bless them. That's what they wanted, and that's what they got. And it's not for me to criticize, but it's not what I wanted. And, you had asked, you told me earlier yesterday, and I really appreciate this because, I have gone out of my way never to talk about wrestling. And there's a reason. I didn't want to be a cartoon. I didn't want to, it was almost like, people wanted to make more jest of you. It's fake and everything like that. And if you would say it, and when I first got out, I was still big, guys wanted to fight you. And I was never opposed to that. But, my hook was always, and I tell a guy, you think you're tough, you think because you're a wrestler, I'm like, you know what? We can do this. Let's go outside. Give me $100. I'm going to put 100. You're going to put 100. I said, if you kick my ass, you get $100 plus you get bragging rights. And I would say a dozen times, guys' mouths hit the floor. What do you mean? It's like, I did this for a living. This isn't a hobby. I'm glad to do it with you. So, I wanted to just fade away. I wanted to, let it go. I didn't want to be known for that. I didn't want to be characterized. Put into a column of, oh, so and it was just, my journey was different. And I'm sure there's other guys that have, taken, similar paths, that it was like, okay, I'm 66, I don't want to be known as 66-year-old ex-wrestler.
It's very smart. I mean, a couple names I'm going to throw at you from the end of WCW. Mark Marrow, Johnny B. Bad, who's gone on to do great things out of wrestling too.
Yeah, he was a nice guy. He was married at the moment to a beautiful woman. He had a gimmick. he was making some good money, and where he went with it. I mean, we're talking a relationship 30 years ago. But he was nice. Who else?
I'm going to bring up Sting.
Sting, I mean, I didn't talk much with him. I don't even know if I was there at the same time he was there. But another one that's, played it out for, 30 years, but again, Undertaker, people loved him. It's just like, Steven Tyler from Aerosmith singing Walk This Way for 50 years. Some people just can't let loose of it. And I understand that, but, the debacle with Lex Luger and Elizabeth and her dying, and you think a lot of unhappiness, and then everyone jumped on, it was just so convoluted. I'm jumping around now. Jesse becomes governor. Jerry Lawler wants to be the mayor of Memphis. Austin Idol's running for something. Tully Blanchard's a preacher. And, I'm standing back and I'm thinking, wow, I got a little business and they're still working their angles. So I'm sure Mark ended up with that. Hopefully he's healthy and happy and, everything's worked out good for him.
Another guy you brought up earlier, Paul Heyman, are you very surprised that he's still kind of going strong? And he's actually in probably the main storyline going on in wrestling today, to this very day.
But, so when I met Paul was like 17 years old. I'm 10 years older than Paul. And he was writing like a little kayfabe sheet or something up in the Northeast. And he was wide open, very intelligent, very driven, very pushy, and Paul was voracious. He was going somewhere. He was a natural for it. Paul it would be like putting someone in front of a piano and they're playing Chopin. And Paul just had it. And I'm sure he has made a fortune. He has been a huge asset to WWF. And some people just integrate really well. But I can't imagine in character development and storylines and everything he's done, but he's like, like Gene. I mean, Paul will be 90 going out with a walker and people will still be yelling at him, but he was interesting. He was there at the whole time with Bam Bam and Larry and Tony Altomore. Remember when we first met, he kept saying, "You're the next Macho Man." And I was like, stop. But he's a good guy. It was enjoyable when he was driving Wahoo Nuts, drawn on his book. I mean, that was hilarious. You'd hear him scream, "Hey, man," and Paul didn't care, which was the best part of it. Paul was like Teflon to all that stuff. Paul had a destination and he made it, good for him.
Who were some of your favorite guys to work with over the years? I know you said you kind of stayed a little to yourself, which, if you look back at anybody's time in wrestling, you kind of have to persevere. Is there anyone that you just enjoyed your time with, guys you're like, these are solid people?
Oh yeah. I mean, Tugboat was good. Bill Dundee was a good guy. I got along really good with Austin Idol. Rick Steiner always made me laugh. He was always a solid guy. I was real tight with Scott. Our falling out was I dated a girl that he hooked me up with that he ended up marrying. So that was the end of that. That didn't work out real well. But when it was over, I kept in touch with nobody. It just all went away. But without I say rambling again, guys I had good matches with, the Guerreros I had good matches with. I had good matches with Billy Jack Haynes, the Oates brothers, Jerry and Ted. I probably had my best match ever with Ted Oates down in Americus, Georgia, and it was probably the most significant one. We're wrestling at a. So I can go forward with this.
Yeah, go.
So we're wrestling at a VFW, and we're the main event. So we go out in the ring, and the whole thing's set up for a double DQ. Well, he lets me have it while I'm taking my robe off. So we go through the whole thing. I'm basically healing on him now. He's letting me beat on him. There's an old woman in the front row screaming at me. So, you always want to, if you're heel, pick that one person to light the whole room up with. So she's screaming. He's laying down right next to the ropes. I hop out. Sorry, there's a fly. And she's yelling, and I pull his head out under the ring. And I said, what? And she goes, "Arr," and I slap him in the face. He's just taking it. He was a star. So she keeps going. I'm building heat with her. And there's an old man sitting next to her. And he sits up, and I said, old man, you got one foot in the grave. I'm getting ready to put the other one in. Sit down. He sits down. So the ref comes up to me. He goes, that's his grandma. I'm like, holy shit. This is a gold rush. So we do our whole thing. Well, at the end, I throw him in the turnbuckle. He moves. I go over the ropes. He lays on the ring. I'm on the floor, double DQ. Go back to the locker room. We're all back there, and he comes up, gives me a big hug, goes, man, that was great. And I'm like, yeah, that went over well. A cop walks in. He goes, we got a problem. And Ted goes, what? He goes, there's a couple guys out there with guns, and they're really pissed with him. And they're pointing at him. He's pointing at me.
Oh.
Yeah, and I don't have a gun. And Ted goes, and the cop goes, I'm the only guy on duty right now. It's Americus, Georgia. Fist on the head of a pin. So Ted goes, well, we got guns. We'll cop. It's all cool. You'll get out of here. And I'm thinking, like, I don't like the term, you'll get out of here. So I go to Ted. I said, man, I'm going to go out there and cut a promo. Is that cool? And he goes, yeah. So all the guys are like standing by the door watching. So I walk out there, and these guys are losing their shit over me. Like, they're not happy. We're going to kill you. We're going to shoot you. And I'm like, oh my God. So where it came from, I don't know. But all I know is I didn't even use the mic. I stepped up on the table, and I said, do you guys remember Pearl Harbor and what the Japs did to us? And they hit us from behind and how we came back. I said, just like that son of a bitch did me. He hit me from behind. Turned everything around.
Wow.
When it was all said and done, they're patting me on the back going, you're a good boy. You're a good boy. And they're saying to Teddy, next time, be a little more honest. We went back, and we had one more match. I don't know how it went, but it's that thing that was like stamped into my brain. Like, man, that was fun. If I could have had like a dozen of those, it would have been a little happier career.
Yeah, what an adrenaline rush.
Yeah, they're mad and they got guns. And I'm thinking, and I'm looking around like, who's he talking to? And he points at me and goes, oh, I'm talking to you. So
it's just a crazy time in the business. Do you think that's kind of missing from wrestling today, that everyone's out in the open? All the guys are talking about, this is what we did to put our match together at WrestleMania. Do you think that's kind of killed the mystique and that little special something it used to have?
Yeah, well, it was so hard scrabble back then, and you still had that element of doubt. Is it real? Is it fake? There's Jesus's picture on the mantle next to Jerry Lawler and Jerry, one of the Fargos, and the people were just, that's all it was. And now it's known quantity, and it's still amazing. You're watching amazing athletes, in these venues. But back then it was, after the match, you'd see Dusty in a 7-Eleven getting a case of beer and getting in whoever he wrestled with into the same car and driving off. If it was Flair, they didn't care, and people knew, but they still loved it. It's that whole tie into, Southern culture, God, guns, wrestling. And, it's everything changes, money changes everything. And I guess, knowing that there's so many just limited spots and so many opportunities to practice your profession and become a journeyman, it's also hard. You don't throw a sign up in a gym anymore, wrestling, and pack it. When I started, the public couldn't get enough of it. You know, it was 7 days a week in every gym, every annex, every VFW church, you know, and, you know, everyone was wrestling, you know, so I don't even know, like, you know, I know Austin Idol has a wrestling school. I don't even know how that stuff does anymore, you know, what the draws. People are, you know, it's just a different time. It's 30 years later.
It is, and now WWE's changing their business model. They're not even doing the house shows or live events anymore. They're just basically sticking to TV at this point.
Yeah, well, you know, it's easier on the guys' bodies, especially, you know, how they're abusing them. But, you know, and they're still making a fortune, but it's, you know, people are, yeah, they've seen it. You know, you know, when you think about it, how old are you?
I am 41.
Okay, so, you know, in the course of your, you know, 30 years that you've been participating in wrestling, you know, the world, I mean, how many things have just changed where people have lost their interest? You know, I mean, I've got a screen that I could watch every event on. Why am I leaving my house? You know, I mean, people have become more complacent. That kind of connectivity has dropped off. And if they can't monetize it, you know, they're not putting them out there. You know, Vince is shrewd enough. I mean, he's a brilliant businessman that we're losing money doing this. We just need to focus on this. Will it ever cycle around? Who knows? You know, they say everything does, but you know, some things just lost leaders. I mean, I know that there's, you know, a couple other organizations, you know, Jared had his, and, you know, everyone got their piece of the pie. But, you know, I saw a picture of Bill Dundee. He's having his, on Facebook, you know, he's having his 81st birthday, you know, and, you know, his little body's all beat up and he's still got his black hair and, you know, he looks like an Oompa Loompa now. And you just think, you know, I guess in a nursing home, if you have dementia, you can tell no one will know that you're telling the same story every night about your match with Jerry Lawler in 1978.
And some say if Jerry Lawler didn't have his major stroke, he'd still be wrestling today, even though he doesn't need the money.
No, but Jerry was an egomaniac. You know, I mean, all the plastic surgery. He was a handsome guy and a talented artist. You know, Jerry did some things that were beyond questionable. You know, that I had seen. You know, at some of the in locker rooms. You know, he had the charge of, you know, taking a girl over the state lines in Louisville. You know, an underage girl, sodomizing her, and he was working for WWF at the time. And you know, they fired him, and then, you know, when it cleared up, you know, he was back 8 months later. And I remember Jerry telling me, yeah, I was at my buddy's store and I met this high school cheerleader, and you know, we hooked up, and you know, we were in Evansville, Indiana, and a guy, I can't remember who it was, he brought his girlfriend and her daughter to the matches. He was a wrestler. And they were in the locker room. They had all these little locker rooms downstairs, or like little, I don't know what, changing rooms. And the little girl was like in the hall, and Jerry came out and, you know, exposed himself in front of the little girl. And I remember Austin Idol, I'm like, it's happening right now, saying, King, you know, you can't do that, King. And Jerry was just like, you know, like, whoa, you're a nut. You know, this is, you know, people shoot people for shit like this. You know, that was one of the things that you know, you were just, I was always perplexed with. But again, it goes back to, you know, you're famous and no one tells you no. You know, no one stops you. You know, all the plastic surgery, it's like, for what? You know, when his son Brian was coming up, I remember I was still wrestling and wrestling for him, and some little girl came up. She must have been 15, 16, and Brian couldn't have been same age. And she walked up to Jerry, and we're talking in the hall, and he lit up. And she goes, "Where's Brian?" And he looked at me and goes, "Well, how the fuck do I know?" And it pissed him off. He thought the girl was coming up to talk to him. and you're thinking, whoa, that's a teenager, dude. You're in your 30s. But, he's the king of Memphis. And, the thing is, when he dies, he'll be forgotten. When I die, I'll be forgotten. But hopefully my conscience will be a little more clear than his. But, that was one of those unfortunate things.
Before we go on, because we like to always end it on a good note. This is being the Wrestling with Reality podcast. We always like to talk about with guys that have a positive note at the end of their careers and, show people there is life after wrestling. One person I do have to bring up though, because you were there at the start of his career and he became, on the same level as Hulk Hogan, Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Austin was good. He was smart. He was a hard worker. For a quiet guy, he knew how to captivate and work an audience. Guys like him, I have a lot of respect for. The Rock, Rocky's son. Look what he turned his life into. And I remember, Fred Ottman telling me about Rocky Johnson's son. He's like a male model. He's super handsome. Wait till he gets here. And some of these guys, and they're good guys. They've taken their success and they've been very generous with it, to people who are unfortunate. They realize it's just money. And, and at this point, I could actually do something good with this. And, Austin was good. Look at Mick Foley writing children's books. He's, number one on the New York Times. What kind of mind is that? He was a great guy, but there were a lot of guys like that, came over my bow. But, there was just some guys that, like I say, not that I'm a naysayer of wrestling. I'm not, wrestling was good. It was an unplanned journey that I gave it my, I don't know if I gave it my best shot, but I was involved in it. I saw, went to Japan, enjoyed, got the hell beat out of me a lot of times. But, for me, after it was over, it took me a long time to figure it out, but, I ended up having successful business, married, family, and you look at it and sometimes, honestly, you just want to pinch yourself. It's like, I didn't think it was going to turn out like this. And, and I hope that for all the other guys, that once they left, and even if they're still plugged into it, that they have, they're loved, they're happy, and they're healthy, and they can enjoy their lives, and this has been a great opportunity because, I've gone out of my way never to talk about this stuff. I've been asked before and, I just, I couldn't get away from it fast enough. I figured when the book was closed, I just didn't want to, Bruce Springsteen glory days. I didn't want to ruminate over it forever. I just wanted to figure out, where do I go now? And it took me a long time to do that, but I needed to be unchained from this because it was a holdback. This would be the last thing I'd ever want to do is, as I was growing my business, tell a client or customer, oh, by the way, I did this, because I would be seen in a different lens. And I didn't want to be seen as a has-been or, something else. And I didn't want to field the questions of like, why didn't your career go anywhere? I saw your matches, they were blank, blank, blank. It's like, okay, all done. Would I do it again? I had to get here. This was, again, a journey that got me to find the woman I love and have a business that I'm blessed with, that I pray my brains out for every day and every night, that, I made it this far.
What would your advice be to anybody who gets in professional wrestling? Like, how do you think they should plan out their journey just to be smart about it so they're not, and they don't end up crippled?
You got to have a backup because your body's only going to last so long. And if you're going to get into wrestling, you got to know that it takes more than it gives. I wouldn't even know how to tell someone to strategize I mean, if you were shaping someone up to be a wrestler right now, what would be the bullet points? You need to be strong. You need to be mentally strong. You need to be just about like a gymnast now. The easiest way to vet someone is on toughness. Is say, when's the last time you had your ass kicked? If anyone says, I've never had my ass kicked, they're not qualified to be a wrestler, because you're going to get your ass kicked and you're going to have to deal with it. You're going to have to do a lot of things you don't want to do and make a lot of sacrifices, the traveling, not making money in the beginning. I don't even know right now, Eric, where you'd even go to start, how you get your foot in the door, what local promotion, how long you can subsidize yourself, because you're going to have to pay your way in. And, it's like you have to have enough money to lose to buy your way in. So the gamble is, it's a high risk stock. I can do this, I can afford it. And if it doesn't work out, what's your backup? Always have, your idea of like, if this doesn't work out, are you a plumber? Are you a fireman? What can I fall back on? Have a fallback. Because last thing you want to do is be 40 years old or 45 years old, living with two other wrestlers who aren't making it in an apartment, trying to make ends meet. And then you realize it ain't going to happen. You're not going to make it at 40 plus. If you're not making it in your early 20s to your mid 30s, Vince is never calling you. You better, and I can't tell you, because don't job on TV. I didn't, because I wanted to protect myself. I just thought, well, if you're doing that, it's going to be hard to get away from. But, Scott did it, and it worked for him. Bigelow, I don't know as much on TV, but he did the house shows with rising stars who were at the end of their career, and they opened doors for him. So maybe in the same process, you could get in and work with some guys who do still have some connections, make them look good at the end of theirs, and maybe they will help you. But I wouldn't even know, how would you get to WWF right now or WWE? How,
It's so different from when you were in it, and even when I started. There's like, wrestling schools on every corner now, and there's just so many shows, and that kind of what convolutes it too. It's like you're one in a million. You're a needle in the haystack trying to make it now. Where back then you guys were filling spots on shows, like you just weren't there for a hot dog and a soda. Even if it was $50 was got you a lot further back then.
Absolutely. And I just never been under the philosophy of work for free. There has to be something to validate what you're doing, because the problem is when you finally ask for money, if you've done it for free forever, they're going to resent you. It's like, why am I paying you? So, that kind of, enthusiasm has to be tempered with a business acumen. It's like, I've got to get paid for this. Let's establish. And as I go get better, I need to get paid more, but I need to get paid. I can't subsidize you out of my pocket to make you wealthier, and that's what jobbers were. That's what guys going on TV, they got their 50 a match or whatever. We never got paid for TV, but it was just, a lost leader for us, but we needed to promote ourselves. And, but you got to have a house, you got to pay rent, you have to pay bills, you have to eat. And I say, the last thing I would have wanted to do, I was 32, I was 34, and it was over, 92. And it was over. And man, I just busted my ass, going forward to have something. Not that at 34, it was the end of my, like you're never going to make a penny. But my mistake was I really didn't know what it was going to be. I would advise guys to be a little more grounded on, if this doesn't work, don't fall in that abyss of, the phone call comes in, hey, you want to do a shot here, and it's 5 hours away or a day away. It doesn't really pay that much, and you're constantly holding out thinking that, magically Vince is going to call you up. Have something. And if that point, it becomes a hobby. If you can't make a career out of it and you still love it, do it on the weekends, when you're available.
Absolutely. And you know what? You're one of the true successful people in professional wrestling. You came out on the other end. You've got a great life. I mean, to me, as someone who's been in the business, that's about as great as headlining WrestleMania.
Oh, listen, it's, again, not to proselytize. I pray all the time. I'm not a church guy, but, being grateful for what you have and not wishing you had more, because, the flip side of it is everything changes in a minute. I just had a buddy who lost his 25-year-old son to cancer.
Oh,
so you have to always be tuned into, what you do have and not what you don't have. Be who you are and don't worry about who you're not. That's folly right there. The people that are going to love you are going to love you for being you. The crowd's paid. You look at all the performers and you think, everyone goes by the wayside. I don't care how big you are. You're Elvis. You go by the wayside. Just try to, find that balance of happiness, but don't pin it on without wrestling, without being successful and being, known. You're nobody. That's a mistake in itself. And so many guys, I see the Danny Davises and guys still wrestling, and you think, good for them, but that's not what I wanted to be known as. I didn't want to be, Tracy Smothers, who was a sweetheart.
Great guy.
Great guy. And it's like, that's all it was, and he would have been an asset anywhere. It didn't have to be just in the ring till he died. But, everybody liked him. Everyone, he was just a lovable guy. But you kind of wonder, there should have been more for him. But, it was his choice. He made his choices and he was happy, hopefully, right till he danced off the earth.
Yeah, he was quite the amazing human being. I met him when I got into the business and couldn't have been any more helpful. Just what a quality human being. It's too bad a lot of people aren't even talking about him nowadays, because he was just such an amazing human being and always willing to help out others, even at his own expense.
Yeah, he was. Listen, there's a lot of stories like that, good guys. And, you just kind of, it's the part where you almost made it, but you didn't make it, or you made it and it didn't last long enough to sustain you. And now you really don't have a skill set, or you're just so upended emotionally, you can't move forward. You're crippled. But I was famous. Well, that ain't going to get you shit in the grocery store, and some guys just can't get past it. It's like seeing, old rockers, if I saw the Stevie Stevens who plays with Billy Idol, well, the two of them, and you're thinking, man, you're still dressing like you did 40 years ago. And for me, it's like, there's no payoff there. It's, you did great stuff, but, you're still hanging on to White Wedding, But again, I'm saying that for me. Whatever I'm saying that I didn't want that for me. If they're happy with it, hey, more power to them, But no, this has been enjoyable. This is, took me a long time to open my yap, and I can't shut it up.
No, it was a true honor to have you on. Thank you so much. To close this out, do you have any plugs? Maybe your shop that you have, your business? Want to maybe plug? Since you opened up Pandora's box too, would you make yourself available for any wrestling signings if you have the time for it?
If like you sending me something for me to sign and send back to you, I never go out and do this.
So you wouldn't ever be available maybe for because there's a lot of wrestling conventions that go on throughout the country.
I would be paralyzed to walk into there. Seriously, it would be worse than, manhood wise, it'd be worse than jumping in a pool of ice. I would shrink up. No, it's over for me. Seriously, it is over. I was panic stricken about this interview today. You know, I told
No,
my
you
wife,
did.
I
You
said,
did an
no,
awesome job. I mean, it was great. Thank you so much.
yeah. If when you
It
know,
was a
if
true
you ever,
honor. I got to see you wrestle at the Great Western Forum in Los Angeles. It was a part of my childhood, and it's just something I really loved. And you're a small part of that piece of the puzzle too. Like, I appreciate it, and I truly thank you for it.
oh, listen, you're a lovely man. If you're ever in Nashville, you know, if you ever come out this way, I got a fabulous house. You seriously come stay with us for a weekend, and you know, we'll have a good time.
That would be great. I'd love to visit you and, get to know the man behind the, gimmick. And I truly want to thank you for your time.
You're very welcome. I'll send you my address, and seriously, take advantage of it anytime you'd like.
Awesome. And anytime you're out in Las Vegas here too, we could always meet up somewhere, and love to have a drink with you and just,
That'd be great.
catch up. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Eric.
Thank you so much, sir. Guys, this is it for the Wrestling with Reality podcast. Thank you so much. And